What up, though? It's Dwayne Barnes, MPA, and this is my class AAS 477, a online virtual self-paced, self-study African American Studies course. And if you're here, you saw me on Facebook, you saw me on Instagram, you got connected word of mouth, or however you did, I want to welcome you to the space. I'm gonna give people a chance to come in. If you are in the YouTube and you are in the chat, say what up, though. Drop a 1 in the chat if you with me. And we're going to be in for a good conversation today. So let me start with, let me take a step back. So this class is a labor of love. It's a passion. It's a calling. It's the third class that I've done. My first class was AAS 477, Economics of Jim Crow, where we looked at post-slavery through the Reconstruction and Jim Crow era. And we went to about 1954. So from 1865 to about 1954. The second class, AAS 477, Power and Protest, we went through the Civil Rights Movement. So 1954 to about 1968. That was 10 classes. And then the first one was 5. Second one was 10. And this is my third class, AAS 477, Black Power, 1968 to 1980. So we're going through the late 60s through the 70s and stopping at, that great decade of the 80s. I was born in the 80s, so I'm feeling that. And this is a course that will allow you to do several things. 1, get a video lecture through what we're doing right now. 2, it allows, if you're signed up for the class, and I'll drop the link, allows you to get this video lecture, the lecture notes. I send out links to the topics that I'm talking about, and supplemental information like articles, book recommendations, documentary, YouTube clip recommendations to further your study. So if you're just watching this video, you're getting maybe 1/3 of what we're offering for this class. And it's important for several reasons. 1, we see that there is an attempt to erase our history. And then 2, even more importantly, we need to know that going through these tough times politically, socially, that our ancestors have done the same. Some to great success, some to great dismay, but they had the heart, the mind, the soul, and the organization to actually get it done. So I want to hold that up, especially as we talk about the heavy topics that we have to talk about today. So I always want to just do a quick little baseline level check with everyone's here. It could be your first time. So I'll drop that link in the chat. So if you want to sign up, I definitely encourage you doing so. So today is week 3 of 10. Well, I gotta kind of give it a preface. So you know how college football does week 0. So this is really week 4, but I call week 1 the introductory week 0, because we did a introductory from the 2 previous classes that I just mentioned. Week 1, we started with the emergence of just the Black Power ideology, and we went down the list of all our great thinkers through time, or the ones that I wanted to showcase. And we looked at, how Black Power has been defined from the time we set foot on this country until present day, or until present day of this class. And then last week we talked about the Panthers, and the first week we talked about, or the second week we talked about Stokely Carmichael and his plight and how he defined Black Power. Last week we talked about Huey P. Newton and how he defined Black Power. And this week we'll be talking about Fred Hampton and his approach to Black Power. So one thing I didn't want to do with this course is to define Black Power for you. I was going to lay out examples, give case studies, and give information so we can define Black Power for ourselves, because there isn't one definition, as you've seen so far. A lot of people define it different ways. Malcolm defined it one way. Stokely Carmichael defined it one way. Huey one way. And we'll see with Fred Hampton today. So today, the center of the course is looking at how the Black Panthers got a national audience. They expanded the chapters, but then also there was a coordinated effort through the government FBI program to dismantle the Panthers, and we'll look at how that happened in a couple of case studies around the country. This is a heavy class for me today. This is a heavy one because this isn't the one where we can kind of asset frame and talk about some of the good things. This is an all-out assault against people who I consider to be my heroes still to this day. So without further ado, we're going to jump into it. I guess I didn't hit this right here. You can keep up with what the conversation is right here with the introduction to Black Power you'll see the underneath my face where we are. So when you go back through your notes or you're looking at this video, you can tell exactly where we are by the subject on the bottom. And like always, like, share, subscribe this YouTube page. Make sure you like it. Make sure you share it out to your networks right here, right now, as we're talking, and comment so we can drive some engagement here. So Black Power, this era began, I would say, roughly around 1963, but really officially around 66. And we're going to take it all the way through 1980. And to some, it's still alive today. So that's just a quick introduction. I want to really jump into the Black Power defined. So I'm going to do this real quick. Black Power defined. And I'm going to share my screen with a graphic that we've been using to catalog our journey into Black Power. And it's always so hard to see on here. That makes me so mad. Let's see, full screen. Yeah, maybe that'll be helpful. Nope, let's take it out of that. So this list, this is the one I was mentioning earlier, our Black Power Matrix, started with Frederick Douglass and his perspective, Booker T. Washington and his perspective, Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, Dr. King, Malcolm X, Stokely Carmichael, and we stopped at Huey last week, Huey P. Newton, the founder of the Panthers. Now, there's so many more names I could have put in here, so many more people that could have been included, but I chose these because, one, I wanted to, but then two, because I think they all represented a very interesting turn in the idea around Black Power. And today we'll be adding Fred Hampton to that list. So if you're aware of Fred Hampton or heard of Fred Hampton, put a 1 in the chat. I just want to know, how much discussion I need to do on him. And then I'll bring well, before I do that, let me get us ready to roll in the class. Well, before I do that, you see these ladies behind me, right? The powerful sisters of the Black Panther Party. One thing I think is a big misnomer about the Panthers was that it was, all fellas all the time doing all this Black stuff, where in fact the leadership may have been, and in some cases it wasn't, but by and large, Black men. The sisters kept the party going like they do with everything else. So I definitely want to shout out the sisters today, and we'll be bringing more ladies of the Panthers in the conversation as we move forward. So a national focus. We're going to talk about the philosophy of Black Power, put it in a little historical context between 68 and 70. That's the window for this class, for this day. And then we finally get into the 70s. We're going to talk about Panther survival programs, some of the government repression, and how they were able to navigate that. This will be one of the centers of our discussion today. Fred Hampton would say, I am a revolutionary. You can kill a revolution. You can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill a revolution. You can jail a revolutionary, but you can't jail a revolution. And that was his perspective. And let's go a little deeper into that. We'll get into the timeline as we move forward. So let's talk Brother Fred here for just a moment. So what made Fred Hampton very unique, and I won't get into the full bio, I will say that he started his political career and we're talking about a kid here. He was 21 when he died, when he was assassinated. But Fred Hampton started his political career as an organizer, youth organizer in the NAACP. And so during that time, the NAACP had a very hands-on coalition building philosophy. So it wasn't just Black folks doing stuff for Black interest, which that isn't bad. They reached out and had coalitions around. So his perspective was one of coalition building. What made him so dangerous, and we'll look at this later in the course around what COINTELPRO didn't want to happen. He was able to organize the brothers on the block, the hillbillies in the rural area, the intellectuals, the middle of the road, Black, white, red, brown. He was able to organize all of those people. And he became a threat because he was saying all power to all people, Black power to Black people, white power to white people, red power to red people, yellow power to yellow people, brown power to brown people, and build that power within yourselves. And let's use our collective power against the oppressors. Not let's just use one part of our power against the oppressors. Let's all come together. We all oppressed. Can I agree with that? I'm talking as Fred. We all oppressed. Let's use this oppression and let's find a common enemy, not each other, and let's use it against them. So the FBI really made it hit their business to take care of Fred Hampton. But I can only give it so much justice. Let me bring Brother Fred up and he can give you a rundown of how he sees the movement. So I'm going to play a couple clips here of Fred Hampton riffing and get perspective on a couple things. Well, before I do that, and he also believed in more of Marxist, socialist kind of philosophy around the proletarian against the power structure, the people against the power, and they wanted to see that dynamic change. You know, people always ask, why were the revolutionaries of the 60s so pressed on these alternative forms of government? Well, one, they felt capitalism was the reason why oppression happens. You can't get unoppressed in capitalism, is their perspective. And the revolutionaries that they looked at in Africa, in Latin America, and the third world countries, they used these tactics to overthrow their government and bring a people-centered philosophy to the government. So, you know, these weren't, you know, idiots saying, okay, we got to get a gun and go out here and fight the power. Nah, they studied political science internationally. So when they were coming up with these ideologies, it wasn't just, you know, out of a bubblegum wrapper. These were steeped in history, they were steeped in revolution, and they were steeped in victory. So I'm gonna let brother Fred Hampton riff for a couple videos here, and then we'll get back to us. I'm gonna share my screen, and we'll hear from the Chairman Fred himself. And this is, we talking again, a young brother. So back then, you know, a brother like him would have been somebody who we talking about getting an NIL deal, somebody getting a scholarship, somebody of that age. This is a young brother. And but he was a leader of men and a leader of people. So I'm gonna bring this one up first. His philosophy on I am a revolutionary. Let me make sure I got my volume right.
The Black Panther Party that they can do anything they want to us. We might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said with the last words on my lips that I am a revolutionary. And you're going to have to keep on saying that. You're going to have to say that I am a proletarian. I am the people. I'm not the pig. You got to make a distinction. And the people are going to have to attack the pigs. The people are going to have to stand up against the pigs. That's what the Panthers are doing here. That's what the Panthers are doing all over the world.
Fred. So that's one, but I want him to dig in a little bit more. This is Chairman Fred giving his ideology on Black power and his ideology on how to fight that power.
Bobby Seale is going through all types of physical and mental torture. But that's all right, because we said even before this happened, and we're going to say it after this, and after I'm locked up, and after everybody's locked up, that you can jail revolutionaries, but you can't jail a revolution. Right. You might run a liberator like Eric Cleave out the country, but you can't run liberation out the country. You might murder a freedom fighter like Bobby Hutton, but you can't murder freedom fighting. And if you do, you come up with answers that don't answer, explanations that don't explain. You come up with conclusions that don't conclude. And you come up with people that you thought should be acting like pigs, that's acting like people and moving on pigs. And that's what we've got to do. So we're going to see about Bobby, regardless of what these people think we should do. Because school is not important and work is not important. Nothing's more important than stopping fascism, because fascism will stop us all.
Okay, we got one more here. Let's see. Specifically around class solidarity, I want to put this up. So when I was talking about, you know, that was just some of his riffing, just to get you kind of used to his style. It's a movie called Judas and the Black Messiah. I can't recommend it because I haven't watched it for a couple reasons, but I'm very particular on the perception of Fred Hampton. But I won't go too deep into it. But I have a couple documentaries I can refer that'll give you a little more on Fred Hampton and his life. All right, I'm gonna share the final one we'll do on class solidarity. This is when he was talking to his interracial coalition here.
And the state's attorney's office has reasons to see Fred Hampton in jail. We've got a new state's attorney, you see. And he said already what he thought about people that had different political beliefs than he had. His speeches sound somewhat like those of Hitler. And we know why he wants to see Fred Hampton put in jail. Why do I have a lot of arrests? Because of harassment. Why is that harassment? Because the people that harass me have set up a problem that made me disagree with them violently. And they set up this problem in order to exploit me and other people like me. And why they want to get rid of me? Because I'm saying something that might wake up some other exploited people and some other oppressed people. And if all these people ever get together, then these pigs that are exploiting us, we'll be able to run them into the lake. That's why they want to get rid of us. And it's just, it's sort of like a primary thing with me. I'm the first move that they'll make. I'm a part of the organization. It will be the first organization they'll move on because I happen to be a part of the organization, the Black Panther Party. That is the only organization, in fact, that has came out and stood up loud and clear and said that we don't care what anybody says, whether they have guns or not and badges or 18 uniforms. If whenever they step outside the bounds of legality into the bounds of illegality, then we'll blow their brains out if they're bothering the people. And what makes them mad about that? They're constantly bothering the people. Anybody that's out there for the protection of the people happens to be in direct conflict with them. What makes them mad about it? What makes them mad about it is that they have black people and white poor people and red poor people and Puerto Rican poor people and Latin American Puerto Rican people of poor people of all descents. They had them caught up in movements based on racism when the Black Panther Party stood up and said that we don't care what anybody says. We don't think you fight fire with fire best. We think you fight fire with water best. We're going to fight racism, not with racism, but we're going to fight with solidarity. We said we're not going to fight capitalism with black capitalism, but we're going to fight it with socialism. We stood up and said we're not going to fight reactionary pigs and reactionary state's attorneys like this and reactionary state's attorneys like Hanrahan with any other reactions on our part. We're going to fight their reactions where all of us people are getting together and have an international proletarian revolution. Right on. And that's saying all power to the people. That's saying that no matter what color you are, there's only two classes. And that's saying there's a class over here and there's a class over there. And the reason that this class over here has never did anything to get this class off its back because this is lower, this is upper. This is the oppressed, this is the oppressor. This is the exploited, this is the exploiter. And these people in this class have divided themselves. They say, I'm black and I hate white people. I'm white and I hate black people. I'm Latin American and I hate hillbillies. I'm hillbilly and I hate Indians. So we fight amongst each other. And you've heard the testimony of pigs here, and you got pigs of all colors, you know that. You got pigs that are white, you got pigs that are black, you even got pigs that are black and white. Propagating the same type of madness that this buffoon Hanrahan would be propagating if he were here himself. And why? Because they want to keep you to believing that I'm your enemy, and that everybody else that's black and that wears a lot of hair on his head and hair on his face, they want to keep you thinking that he's your enemy. Why? Because if ever you would disregard him and overlook him just for a minute and throw away that question of racism and start into dealing with a little logic, then there would be no one else you could attack other than Hanrahan, other than Davy, and other than Tricky Dicky Nixon. If you make the right decision, then the oppressed people of the world will get complete satisfaction. I know you return a verdict of not guilty. Thank you.
So that's just a small example of how this Chicagoan, I don't know if I say it like that, brother from Chicago, young brother from Chicago, and we'll go more into his plight and his work in Chicago. But just as a basis, I think this is a very interesting perspective on Black power, centering it around class power, which is traditional when you think about some of the non-capitalist structures politically and ideology, is saying, you know what, it's more of us than them. Speaking poor people versus the rich or those in power. So why not leverage this coalition that we can have and all work to that? And he was successful at it. For the time that he was alive, he was successful at it, and that was something that the powers that be couldn't stand. And so they moved with great earnest to ensure that Chairman Fred would no longer be here with us. So you can drop in the chat any questions you have about Fred Hampton. We'll talk more about it as we move forward. So I wanted to kind of drop that on us, and then let's jump back into our deck here. So let's talk about, let's put this in a historic timeline here today. So, you know, if you've noticed, if you've been keeping up with me, you've noticed we've been in this era from 66 to 68 since we started. And the reason why is that time is where so much happened. You had so many things happening, and it took time to get through these weeks of 66 to 68, now up until 70, to where we can start to have a conversation about what happened in the 70s. The civil rights class, we talked about what got us through civil rights. Well, we talked about in 66, it was a change from, you know, the I'm moving too fast. The strategics or the nonviolent civil rights movement, and as it started to transition into Black power. And this transition, I wanted to really spend a lot of time on how civil rights organizations like SNCC and CORE started to transition, how the Panthers popped up and gave an opportunity to transition over, how the riots of 66, uprisings, riots, whatever you want to call them, from 66, 67, 68, after Dr. King was assassinated, really started ushering us into that. And then how government replied and said, okay, through the Kerner Commission, the report that LBJ put together to show what was going on, or why the uprisings were happening, and it actually told the truth, and how the government started to supplement itself and say, this is how we fight against those riots, and this is how we fight against the freedom fighters. So here we got 68, Dr. King gets killed, September 68. We talked about, we ended at Free Huey last week, Huey P. Newton, and an officer got into an altercation. Officer ended up dead. Huey ended up shot, and started the Free Huey campaign. December 4th, 1969, Fred Hampton is assassinated, and 1970 in August, Huey is freed. A lot more we'll talk about, but these are just some general roadmaps along the way. We'll get back to the 68 presidential election and everything that came with that, because that was a part of some of the change that was happening here. So let's jump to some of the survival programs. So we talk about the Panthers in a lot of different ways. These brothers carrying guns, these brothers trying to off the pig, these brothers trying to do all of this stuff. Well, and you know, everything that the Panthers, well, I'll say this, and I always have to say this when I talk about the Panthers. It's an old adage that says, if you blindfold a person and you have them touch an elephant, the one who's close to the horns, they would have a different experience with that elephant than someone who touched his back, or someone who touched his tail, or somebody who touched his snout. I don't even know if that's what it's called, or his ear. So that's how it is with the Panthers. Depending on which chapter you're talking about, depending on what people you're talking about, you'll get a different result, because the party grew so fast, and they did a great job of throwing the leaders in prison early, that the party started to grow, and having to do more micro, hyper local activism. So whoever was the activist that started the chapter in whatever city, they set the tone for what that city was. And of course, they tried to abide by what the national organization said. But if you in Oakland and we in Detroit, or you in Oakland and we in Philly, or you in Oakland and we in Houston, or you in Oakland and we're in Denver, we're going to deal with things the way we see fit. And that was a tactic of COINTELPRO to make sure the leadership wasn't there to ensure that you could have a uniform party. And we'll talk about that as we move forward. Let's see. So I want to go back up to my deck here, and I don't think it's not in order for this one. Nope. Let's talk about some of the survival programs. So a key part of the Black Panther Party was service to their people, defending their people. That's why they had guns in the first place. We want to defend our community. And any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. So a part of protecting the community was several things. One, we know they had, the patrols when they were able to, especially out in Oakland, they patrolled the police. So they ensured that the police weren't brutalizing their people who they were in charge of. But also the survival programs, and we also knew it was a newspaper, the Panther News Service, where they were able to share their philosophy, their work, their perspective, their art, their culture, their message through newspapers and through enterprising commerce. That's how they kept themselves open. But they also had survival programs for the community. And the most important program was the Breakfast for Kids program. for several reasons. One, we know kids can't go to school without a proper breakfast. We know kids need role models, and they need political training. They need things. They need so much that we need to pour into them. So the Panthers solved several problems in one. We're going to feed these kids. And feeding these kids, we're going to make sure that they, one, can go to school and get a really good education and become freedom fighters one day. They might be doctors. They might be lawyers. They might be business people. They might be who knows. And then we can give them a ideology of pride. We can give them an ideology of revolution. So when they do go out into the world, they have this basis of being trained, similar to what other cultures do. Real talk. It was an opportunity to build these kids up to solve for the food insecurity in Black communities and to build revolutionary consciousness through service. And this was one of the programs that COINTELPRO wanted to stop the most. And we started to see some of these breakfast programs taken out of the Panther communities and into the schools. So no, don't go to the Panther breakfast. Come here and do it at school so we can indoctrinate you. Also the medical clinics. So a part of their philosophy is, you know, we have to do for self. We can't and we can't lean on the power structure to do nothing for us. And outside of feeding these kids and ensuring they have a strong foundation, providing the medical assistance we can to our community is very important, because we know how, you know, it can be in urban communities. Free medical clinic and dental services, sickle cell anemia testing, community health education initiative. So in that coalition, you had Black, white, red, brown, whoever you had, people serving the community. So you didn't just come to the Panthers and get a gun and go chase some cops down. No, you got to come serve at the breakfast program. You got to volunteer at the medical clinic. We got a food pantry and education we doing, arms training we doing. You got work to do in the community. And this is the side of the Panthers they don't talk about it. They don't want you to see. Yeah, we had to hold and I'm speaking as a Panther. Yeah, we had to hold the power structure accountable. But outside of that, we was feeding the kids and building and educating. We were addressing medical needs in the community. We were selling newspapers in the community. We were providing food and education in the community. And they called these the survival programs. And this part of the organization started to grow as some of the laws started to prohibit some of the other things, and as some of the attacks started to prohibit some of the more revolutionary action. These programs started to become the staple of the organization, and it started to cause a rift between leadership who thought we should still be fighting the power and leadership who saying, well, look, we got to pivot a little bit and handle some of this stuff as we move forward. Just looking through my timeline real quick. Yep. Okay. Let's see, what do we have after this? Okay, so let's go back. So now let's put this in a little bit of context. So now we're at the point where there's a presidential election. LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who we talked about a lot during the civil rights class, who passed the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and after Dr. King was murdered, the Fair Housing Act, but also implemented some programming that wasn't so good. He found himself hung by Vietnam. Vietnam killed his political ambitions to continue for president, so he was out of the race, and you had a race between Nixon and LBJ's vice president, Hubert Humphrey. So in 1968, and we'll talk about this as we move forward, it was a Democratic convention in Chicago, and that's what Fred Hampton was talking about, where anti-war activists, and Bobby Seale was one of those, protested outside of the convention. Uprising ensued. Bobby got up out of there, and they brought him back as a part of the Chicago 7. And we'll talk about more about that moving forward. But the Nixon versus Humphrey election was a very controversial election. Nixon was running on law and order. Let's get these streets back in order because they was rioting. Let's get these folks back in order because they holding guns. And let's put the foot down on these folks because they trying to get freedom. And Hubert Humphrey didn't have what it takes to muster a fight against Nixon. Really, it was a close race. They both tried to play the law and order role, but in the end, Tricky Dick Nixon won, and we know he had to resign a few years later because some of his action. So a part of Nixon's rise to power was the law and order mandate. We're kind of seeing that play out now. If you watch what the Supreme Court did the other day, heard anything coming out of the current administration. They're talking law and order against a certain group of people. Well, during this time, it was the us was the people they talking about, and now they're talking about, you know, other people of color. And I hate using that word, but I'm using it because I'm here on live. Who they're targeting. So this law and order mandate said, one, we're gonna get these motherfuckers back in order, and two, we're gonna use every piece of the government to do so. And then think about it, at the same time, you're still fighting a war in Vietnam that's very unpopular. You still got their kids, their youth getting shot down like at Kent State, and doing an anti-war protest around the country. So it's a lot of political volatility happening at this moment. I was getting ready to say that. Yep, absolutely, absolutely. And it's you know, and that's why, you know, a major part of this class is reminding us that, you know, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And so, to make a long story short, Nixon ended up winning the election, and they targeted Black liberation. He won 43.4% of the vote. And there was a third person in there, Wallace, Governor Wallace, who we talked about earlier in the civil rights class, who took 13.5%. So Hubert Humphrey was left on the outside. So before we get more into the Panther work, I want to look more into some of the government's work that helps subsidize this police action against the Panther. So a lot of what we're talking about today is how the police and the federal authorities targeted and looked to exterminate the Panthers. And they didn't do so just without a green light. They got funding, laws passed, and the green light from the president to say, you do what you want to these, you can do it. So one we talked about first was the Law Enforcement Act of 1965, which provided federal funding and militarized local police forces against Black communities. So the weapons you would see and the surveillance you would see in Vietnam, they gave it to local and state police. And so you had state and local police with more power than they ever had and a green light to use it. So it provided military equipment to local police departments. It created the SWAT team. I know you saw the movie SWAT or know about SWAT, to local police departments. It funded police training and counterintelligence tactics. So they were using very sophisticated tactics at that time. Before that, it was a separation between local police and federal police. Well, this kind of bridged that so they could eliminate, and we'll talk about some of COINTELPRO's goals as we move forward, eliminate who they felt were the opposition. And it established federal coordination between local and anti-Panther operations. So this is big stuff. You got the feds coming in saying, we giving you the green light, and we giving you the money, and we giving you the military weapons, and we giving you the technology to do it. As we moved into 1968, the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act, which is a comprehensive law targeting Black self-defense and revolutionary organizing, it criminalized the possession of firearms by subversives, and they talking about people who felt they wanted freedom. It banned interstate sale of guns to prohibited persons, and if you're being targeted by local and federal police, you on the prohibited persons list, of course. It created law enforcement agency, the LEEA, which also facilitated this. So this is an organized, strategic, funded attack. So it was an attack in Vietnam, in South Vietnam, and it was attacking every local community where the Panthers and other revolutionary organizations were. It funded wiretapping and surveillance of Panther activities, among other things. And then the Gun Control Act of 1968 was a direct response to Black Panther armed resistance and patrols. It prohibited felons and mental health defectives from owning firearms. So if I got pulled over by the police and I was a Panther, they said I had all these problems. Now I'm a felon. Now I can't move the way I want to. It banned mail-in order rifles and shotguns, which I won't get into that. It requires serial numbers on all firearms so they can identify who had them. We ain't do it before when the KKK was maneuvering. We ain't do it when the Citizens Council was maneuvering. But now brothers with guns starting to come together. Now we need to figure some more things out. That's the bullet I'm talking about. And then it targeted Panther open carry demonstrations where, we talked about in Oakland in California where they stopped the open carry, where they did the same across the country. So this law and order philosophy did two things. One, it unified police operations, and then two, it gave the FBI all they needed to infiltrate and navigate against the Panthers. And I see we got a couple comments here. Yeah, it's crazy. Very, very, very crazy. Let's see. Let's go a little bit further into Because a part of the framing for today is these Panthers just weren't attacked by local police. They were given the green light to annihilate their opposition. American citizens, your opposition, not the. I thought you said the Viet Cong was your opposition. I thought you said all these other folks. But what tied it together was you have these revolutionary organizations using alternative political ideology to capitalism. So when they saying, you know, we the proletarian, we trying to fight against these fascists, we believe in socialism, to the powers that be, that's anti-American. But to the people who saying it, they're saying capitalism ain't helped me during slavery. Capitalism ain't helped me during Jim Crow. It didn't help me during civil rights. A lot of people saying the same thing about black excellence and black capitalism today. That ain't saving me from getting pulled over, stop and frisk. That ain't stopping my son from changing. So how do we have this conversation? So this is another example of how those federal laws had direct local action. So we talking about 65, 67, 68, 2 laws. And then 70, we'll see the Racketeer Influencer Act that was used against the Panther 21. So as we're seeing today, laws are being put in place so you can persecute a certain group of people for anything that they do. And so we're seeing history kind of play itself out. So I'll take a moment just to leave that up for you to take a look at it. And if you're signed up, see, this is the thing, if you signed up for the class, if you're signed up, you can get this information, this deck, and get this information. All right. So let's just do a quick summation. One, we talked about Fred Hampton and his coalition ideology, his proletarian ideology that says we oppressed people need to come together and fight against the pig. The pig is the power structure. We talked about the Panther survival programs, that you didn't just get a gun. You didn't just off the pig. You ain't just go kill Whitey. You ain't just sit up in the Panther office smoking and drinking. You had service you had to give to the community. And we're looking at the laws that enabled this assault that we're going to look at on the party. So it's important that we always put things in context and we take our time and understand that this attack against Black revolutionary organizations is important. I mean, if you want to be real about it, this isn't the class for it, but they did a similar thing to their own kids. When I talk about their own kids, these folks who were anti-war, who were brave enough to fight against their parents and grandparents, these white folks, COINTELPRO was watching them. They were being shot on campuses as well, but it wasn't as damning as it was to the bastard child of America. All right. So let's move forward here. Yep, we talked about survivor programs. Yep, so there were legislative attacks, legal persecution, COINTELPRO opportunities or operatives, and police raids against the Panthers. So these were the tactics that were used. So think about it. You got these brothers and sisters around the country in these cities looking to organize and find freedom for their people, and you see a full assault by the government, a full assault in the courtroom, in the legislative branch, in the FBI, and in local police. Like, that's how you know that these brothers, one, had it right, and two, they were fighting for something that was so worth it that the government deployed all of their power and their agency to stop. Okay, so let's stop here and let's get to the Free Huey campaign. So we talked about last time. Any questions, throw them in the chat. Any comments, throw them in the chat. We're going to move forward to Huey P. Newton in his case. Well, Huey P. Newton and his Free Huey campaign. So, you know, Huey got into it, like I mentioned earlier, with a cop. He and a fellow Panther in Oakland were driving up the block, and a cop who was known for having it out against the Panthers came up behind them. This is after the Mulford Act passed. And the Mulford Act, that's another law that was in California that said you can't open carry the way you could before. Even the NRA was against this, and the NRA ain't never against you having a gun, but they were when the brothers was holding the guns in the 60s in Oakland. So this cop comes out, harassed the Panthers in the car. A fight ensues, and the cop ends up dead. Huey ends up shot, and now we have this thing going on. Huey is facing manslaughter charges against an officer. You get intense scrutiny by the officers against the Panthers, and this is just the Oakland Panthers. And now you have this Free Huey campaign. So those who are out Eldridge Cleaver still at the time, Bobby Seale at the time, who were the leaders of the party, going around the country and going around the state, raising money and raising their cause to the people to say, how can we figure out a way to get Huey a fair trial, one, and get this brother out of the prison? He our leader. We want our leader out. Let's see what the classic song was. Black is beautiful, free Huey, set our warrior free, free Huey. So during civil rights, they had their own freedom songs, but during Black Power, they had their songs as well. So, you know, every rally you go into, and this, like we mentioned earlier, the Panthers believed in all power to the people. So they weren't limited in just the belief of this is only a Black movement, this is only a white movement. Anybody that believe in freedom, anybody that believe in the 10-point platform, we will open the ranks to maybe not membership, but coalitionship. And I see we got a couple of comments here. Let me check and see what's going on here. You are right. The Panthers weren't on right. Exactly. Yep. You say you are right. If the Panthers weren't on the right track, government wouldn't have moved so quickly up. This group had all the areas covered. Yep. Exactly. And so this movement was a multiracial movement. It was a multicultural movement, multi-economic class. Celebrities was getting involved. People who just were on the side of freedom. And so you saw them raising money. You saw them raising hell, and you saw them doing everything to get Huey out. So, make a long story short, one of the Panthers chose a white lawyer to defend Huey. They said, you know what, we want to go with the brothers, and they had like a team, like OJ had, like Johnny Cochran had the team of other lawyers around them. They had the brothers there, but they said, we want to deploy you on some of the other ones in this big one. We want to get as fair as opportunity as we can. We want Huey to come home, and to do that, we're going to be strategic. So, and I'm gonna tell you more about the campaign. I'm not gonna go through the intricacies of the campaign. I'm just gonna get to the main point. We can talk about things as we move forward. So, to make a long story short, what Gary, that was the name of the lawyer, what he was trying to do was he was trying to place a shadow of a doubt on if Huey did it or not. So Huey was in the car with another gentleman. And we know that the police wanted Huey P. Newton because he was the head of the Panthers. He was the one when the patrols first started, was ripping off the legal jargon and what you can and can't do. He was the one unafraid and up in these cops' face when they needed to do stuff. So they wanted him off the feet. What they say, strike the head and the body will fall. And so what the lawyer did was he said, you know, after the prosecution said everything they could about Brother Huey to get him, he's a hatist, he's a supremacist, all this stuff he gonna do. He brought, he said, I got a witness to come to the stand. It was the person who was with Huey that day, and said, you know, they're saying Huey did it. Is that true? Did he do it? And the brother up there said, you know, I want to plead the Fifth Amendment, basically trying to say it could have been me, but I don't want to incriminate myself in this process, so I'm just gonna plead the Fifth. So it was able to cast a shadow of a doubt on the case. And I'll get to what happened with that case as we move forward. No, I'll just say it now. Huey was convicted for 2 to 15 years for manslaughter to police, and they took Huey off the streets. So you had Huey off the streets from October 67 until 71 when he got out. So all this stuff we're talking about, Huey went to prison. He was in prison, waiting in prison. And if you read the book, I put it in last week's notes, Revolutionary Suicide, he'll tell you what it was like to be in prison during that time. And so now you have a situation where the leader is in prison. And so you have Bobby Seale, the chairman of the party, still free. You have Eldridge Cleaver, the minister of information, free. And now you have a situation where the party is starting to grow in ways we haven't seen before. So let me see where we are in our day. Revolution. Okay, yeah, we still want to move forward before we get there. All right. So let's stay in Oakland for a minute. We're going to look at how the party moved and how it grew, but let's stay in Oakland for a minute. So we talked about a date that will always live in our memory, April 4th, the day before my daddy was born, and a couple of days before my youngest son is born. He's born, I won't say that, but he was born in April. Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, through more government and COINTELPRO actions. But after that, Eldridge Cleaver and Bobby were the two leaders we just talked about. He wanted to ride on his enemies. I'm talking about how Pac would talk. He wanted an armed resistance against the police to show the community and to show the Panthers that we can't just take this. You killed the one man who wouldn't hurt a fly. You kill him. We done with it. We ain't doing it. And Bobby is like, man, we can't do that, bro. You crazy? Keep in mind, Bobby just got out of jail because when they went to Sacramento to protest the Mulford Act, that was the act that would stop open carry for Panthers in California to do the patrols and to protect themselves. He just got out of jail doing a 6 months stint. So as Huey is going in, Bobby is coming out there with Eldridge, who was famous author from Solo on Ice and kind of the celebrity of the group. He's saying there need to be fire and war and all this kind of stuff happening. And and Bobby like, hold on, bro, we can't do that. That's a death wish. And we are revolutionaries, but we ain't suicide bombers. You know what I'm saying? We don't want to get into like that. And so those who felt, and this ain't gonna be the last time we talk about Eldridge having a different perspective. So Eldridge took with him those who wanted to do revolution in that form. And to make a long story short, one of them that went with them was Bobby Seale's mentee, Little Bobby Hutton, who was the first member of the Black Panther Party. And so it was basically a shootout between the police, the Oakland police, who remember got the battery pack because of all these laws and because of COINTELPRO and because everything passed. A shootout with Eldridge and those who went with him. And Little Bobby was one of them that went with him. And they called for everybody to come out. And remember, Eldridge spent some time in the pen prior, so he knew how to handle the cops. So he came out butt naked, hands up, so they wouldn't shoot him. Well, little Bobby, 16 years old, he ain't want to get down like that. So he kept his underwear on, came out with his hands up, and they shot 20 shots through him. And it might not be 20, but they loaded him up and they killed him. So the first Oakland member to succumb to police retaliation was Little Bobby Hutton, and that changed the game for the Panthers. That was the youngest member. It was the first member. It was everybody's little brother. It was everybody's little homie. It was everybody's young king. I don't say YN. I say young kings, young businessmen, young kings. He was everybody's little homie, and seeing that really changed the party. Huey locked up. The thought behind it is locked up. So you got everybody else out. Eldridge saying he doing his bull. So now we're having a problem in Oakland. So you got the police squadding up, and now you having problems within the party. And as the party is growing across the country, they looking at Oakland like, well, what we supposed to do? So Bobby Hutton is killed. Eldridge, who was, and I put OTOO, I meant to put O, yeah, on the run. If you remember, Beyonce, Jay-Z had an On the Run song. So this was a violation of Eldridge Cleaver's parole, and so he went on the run. So after that, he went to flee the United States because they called him to go back to prison and finish his sentence for his 1958 convention. He jumped on bail and he left for Cuba, and then from Cuba he went to Algeria, where he stayed in Algeria, and we'll talk more about Stokely ended up in Africa, the motherland too. And so there he started the first international office for the Black Panther Party in Algeria. And when he got there, because of his revolutionary activity, he just left a shootout with the Panthers. He went to Cuba because that's where Castro was, and who, believed in socialism, more revolutionary kind of ideology. So when he got there, he was, beloved. And we'll talk about another. So he ended up, we talked about earlier how Ali fought against the government and went to Africa and felt the vibe there. We'll talk about during our funk conversation, how the music changed from soul to funk, how James Brown went to Africa and was applauded there. Eldridge Cleaver in this situation ended up in Africa. He was applauded there. So Africa was a big spot for our revolutionaries and our freedom fighters during that time. The leaders of North Vietnam gave Eldridge Cleaver their old base, so they had a base down there to start out overseas. He tapped in with the alliances Malcolm wanted to build. Remember, at the end of Malcolm's life, he was trying to build international allegiance to fight against what was going on here in America. So we're talking about North Korea, the Chinese, the African liberation movements. So he was tapping into that. So he took the struggle for Black power overseas to the motherland, which was a blessing and a curse. We'll see later how that plays out. So Little Bobby is dead. Eldridge is on the run. Police have the battery pack from the government, and now you got to deal with what's going on. So let's kind of move to party expansion. So after the Panthers in 19, again, drop any questions you got in the chat. If you're still with me, hit the 1 in the chat so I know you're here with me. Any questions, drop them. I want to get through this conversation and really kind of set the stage before we get to kind of, you know, what's happening here. So as the party started to expand, you got Huey in jail, you got Bobby raising money, and you got Eldridge now out of the country. And so you're having to lean on some of your other leadership. We're talking about Kathleen Cleaver. We're talking about Elaine Brown. Well, not Elaine yet, but other Panthers in the process. David Hilliard, who was the chief of staff, who ended up in charge later as we move forward. So you're having to use Panther staff from Oakland to start to help these other chapters start if they can. Because even people in Oakland, well, I was on my way to do something. I got took by the pig. I was over here selling the paper. Now I'm taking out. So you're having a very decentralized movement happen. So I'm from the west side of Detroit. I'm just saying this as a person from the west side of Detroit. I'm from the west side. I'm starting a chapter. I wrote a letter to them, and I'm starting a chapter. I'm in the 10-point platform in the program, but now I'm starting. I'm in Oakland. I'm in Philly. I'm all these different places, and it's starting. And the Panthers in the central office in Oakland is doing their best to get the information out of what it takes, because typically this is what would happen when everybody was still in place and you wanted to start a chapter. You would come out to Oakland. You would participate for 6 weeks in the breakfast program, the political training. You would have to go through your arms training. You would have to be indoctrinated to the process. And then a couple Panthers went back with you, started the process up, and you was good. But as the leaders started to find themselves in peril, this happened less and less and less. And so you started to see more of chapters starting to use the Black Panther name, and some of them didn't even use the name. Well, we the brothers against fascism. We the black, but we will say we a Panther chapter. And so you started to have a decentralized Panther movement happening, but a centralized attack on them Panthers. So now, okay, I'm in the city of Detroit, and I'm using Detroit because that's where I am. I'm in the city of Detroit. Well, now we got Detroit police, we got the state police, we got the feds doing monitoring, we got them doing surveillance, we got them doing all this stuff. And you having a tough time of putting it together because you ain't sitting there with Brother Bobby getting the rundown. You're not sitting with Huey. You're not sitting with Eldridge. You're not sitting with Kathleen. You're not sitting with Erica Huggins. You're not sitting with these people. You're just doing it the best you can. So it was kind of like shooting ducks in a barrel in one sense, because you had a decentralized party growing, but a centralized adversaries against you. And so it became hyper local. So a lot of the things we'll talk about today, you'll see like the issues that they were having in Detroit or Chicago or Philly or New York or LA were really centered around the local police with FBI and intelligence attacking. And so it made it very easy for them to attack. But it also, on the flip side, it made the Panthers want to embolden themselves because we're dealing with the local issue. We got a problem with Officer Carver. We got a problem with Officer Danson. We got a problem with these people, and it was a long history, so we know what's going on. So it was a very interesting time to be expanding exactly chaos, what was happening. But so let me take it to a micro level. So let's say I am one of these chapters. Now, we did have people who said, you know what? Because you think about it, anytime you're building an organization, you got the administrative people, the people who do best with the administration. So they wrote the letters and they did get the information. You got the people who like the parliamentarian kind of people to say, no, this is how a chapter is supposed to run. We're supposed to do a breakfast program. So we making sure we got a breakfast program, and I'll lead that. We're supposed to have political training. We're supposed to have. So all of them did have some of the core elements, but they may not have been as steeped in the intellectual and the political part as the Panthers hoped. A part of the Panther platform was service to the community and political, and I'm going to say indoctrination, but I don't mean it like that. A way for you to understand that our fight against society is a political one, and we're all prepping for the revolution. I haven't mentioned that yet. So everybody in this time, not everybody, what was hoped in revolutionary organizations is that when you look at what happened in Cuba, when you look at what happened during the motherland during the 60s, there was a moment that happened where revolution happened and somebody was brave enough to take the government down and the government was overturned. So you would hear these different chapters say, we ready for the revolution. It's a Common got a video called, might be called The Revolution. Him and Bilal from the year 2000. And you know, Dilla did the beat, where it would show you what a revolution looked like. It's like a riot, and you get to the power structure and you take them down, and now the people are in charge. So everybody's preparing for this revolution. We're getting arms for the revolution. We're raising money for the revolution. We stopping the cops for everything we're doing is for this moment where we have this interaction with the power structure and we win and we take over. So everybody's prepping for the revolution to happen. So while we're preparing, the revolution is going to happen, because that's what happened in all these other places. So you have these chapters who may be decentralized from national, but they've been carrying these long issues. So people who, so I would liken it to this. Remember when you would have a student sit-in Greensboro, and then all of a sudden around the country, bow, sit-ins everywhere. That's kind of like this. We all had our own issues. So these chapters were well prepared to handle the local issue, but they didn't know they had the feds. I ain't gonna sing that song. They know they had the feds. They didn't know they had local police, and they were emboldened. So they were fighting against a beast bigger than what they knew. And I see a comment here, so I want to check that out. More like a worldview, exactly. All right. And so as the party expanded, this is what's supposed to happen again. 6 weeks of training, arms training, political training, service training, making sure you got your projects up and making sure you're selling the paper so you can fund yourself, because you had to keep yourself up and running. You had to lease an office. You had to have a central place where people could come and have meetings, where you could put the paper together, where you can do your political training classes. So you had to have some things. So when we think about the party, it's so many people I'm not naming, who I'll get to later when we do our retrospective later in the class, that had to take this burden on. And you got a legal defense fund you building, because in all these cities, people getting arrested, people getting, all this stuff is happening. So I want to take a moment. So you have cities like Atlanta, Baltimore, Boston, Chicago, Cleveland, Dallas, Denver, Detroit, Kansas City, LA, Newark, New Orleans, New York City, Omaha, Nebraska, Denver, Colorado, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, San Diego, San Francisco, Seattle, Toledo, DC. Panther chapters popping everywhere. And all of these young revolutionaries looking to fight the power, and a government structure ready to fight them. So at its peak, the Panthers had nearly 5,000 members. And so we got a government, full police control to put on 5,000 members across the country. 5,000, not 500,000, not 5.5 thousand, 5,000. That's a couple hundred in each city, Not, it ain't even like that. And at their height, they were selling 5,000. The membership was 5,000. They were selling. The paper had a circulation of 250,000. So we're still talking about a very small group in essence, but big in idea and power. And I wanted to show this. Let's see, this map here. Let me share my screen. Now, this graphic is a very interesting one in that this was a Mapping America social project from University of Washington, and they showcased a map for a lot more uses than well, I'm working on a map project that you'll see later after this class is over. But this project that they were working on was a map, and I'll put this link into those who signed up for the class. This is a map that showed the different kind of events that happened with Panther chapters around the country. So arrests, attacks, convictions, demonstrations, educational support, meetings, politics, fleeing and hijacking, legal matters. So all the cities we talked about, and some of the other cities too. Like, just because you weren't a major city didn't mean you didn't have a chapter. So I may not have been in the Detroit chapter in Battle Creek. In Detroit, but I might have been in one in Battle Creek, one in Jackson, one in Lansing. Kind of like how Black Lives Matters chapters were sprouting up around the country. And I know they get a bad rap. I know they get a lot of hate for what they were doing, but that was a similar kind of thing. So this is just an idea on map, and these are just the ones that they tracked. These aren't even all the chapters around the country. So I want to leave that up for just a moment, just to get a look at that, and to see, because also you'll see as we move forward, You know, this kind of revolution wasn't for everybody. Some said, you know what, I'm still on the route to fight the power through the civil rights way. We had all these laws passed. Let's hold the government to that. Let's make sure the schools are integrated. Let's make sure equal accommodations happen. Let's make sure that there's quotas in the government so people can work. Let's make sure we have things moving that way. So the Panthers and the revolutionary Black Power perspective was just one way to do it, as other people still stay moving forward. So that's kind of a Cliff Notes version of party expansion. We talked about the election and we talked about its context. And so now I want to move forward to Panther attacks nationwide. So I'm glad we had that map up. So I could spend the whole class, the whole 10 classes, talking about the different cities and what happened. But for the purposes of this conversation, we're going to look at 4 unique Panther operations and what happened. We're going to look at Chicago and what happened with Fred Hampton. We're going to look at New York and what happened to the Panther 21. Shout out to Afeni Shakur, Tupac's mama. So if you know anything about Pac's lineage, his mama was Afeni Shakur, a part of the Panther 21. And we'll talk about that as we move forward. We'll talk about the LA Panthers. You know, one unique thing. Well, before we get there, I want to go back to COINTELPRO. We'll talk about what happened with the shootout in LA with the SWAT team against Geronimo Pratt and the Panthers, and talk about what happened between the United Slaves, which is Karanga's organization, a gentleman who started, who founded Kwanzaa. He and his boys had an interaction with Bunchy Carter and John Huggins in LA through COINTELPRO infiltration. And so I want to talk about those 4: New York, Chicago, and LA. And I'll leave links to some of the other ones as we move forward. But before we do that, I wanted to, and I think I don't have it here in a graphic, but I'll talk about it. So we have to remember a couple of things. Yeah, I do. And the notes may be a little bit, I won't put them in notes. I'll just talk about it. So the goals for COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program, they have 5 main goals. And I want you to think about this as we continue through our conversation and as we talk about 1, these attacks, but 2, some of the other areas where we were able to, African Americans were able to maneuver during this time. So the first goal of COINTELPRO was to prevent the coalition of Black nationalist organizations. They knew that there was unity and strength. So everything that they wanted to do, they wanted to build mistrust, misinformation, infiltration to these organizations so they couldn't come together. That was the number 1 rule. So even if you have Panther chapters around the country, let's say let's infiltrate and kill them from the inside, but let's also isolate them from other organizations to where it might be, well, we the nationalist brothers that believe in, I changed my name to an African name and I believe in this stuff. Well, we're going to drive a wedge between you and the people who believe in revolution. We want to do whatever we can to stop the unification. 2, they wanted to prevent the rise of a Black Messiah. And Fred Hampton was one that they identified. Stokely Carmichael was one that they identified. As we look back, Malcolm X was one they identified. Huey P. Newton was one they identified as could be a Black Messiah, one that could bring the people across the America together to have a coup or a Mau Mau situation. They wanted to prevent violence on the part of nationalist groups. And if you know anything about them, self-defense was the name. It wasn't about doing violence. They wanted to prevent Black militant organizations from gaining respectability by discrediting them and separating the segments of the community. And they also wanted to distract the youth. They didn't want the youth to have their eyes on revolution. They wanted it on music and on fashion and on entertainment. They did everything they could to keep Black youth from organizing, because if you look back at the uprisings of the late 60s, that's who was doing it, the young people, those who had the least to lose and the most to gain. So they wanted to make sure. So as we start having conversations about Soul Train, about Blaxploitation films, about the first Black to do this, about all these other things, while these people were talented and they did earn their spot to do these things, these were government plans to say, well, let's have them go to the movies and watch Shaft. Don't have them worship Huey P. Newton. Don't have them follow Bobby Seale or Eldridge Cleaver. They can do Shaft. They can watch The Mac. They can watch The Godfather, not Godfather, Harlem. Cotton Comes to Harlem, or any of our favorite Blaxploitation films. But in the same regard, we don't want to, talk down to the artists who were just talented enough to play those roles and do it. But you got to think about that. No, I don't have them worried about revolution. Have them worrying about the funk music and Soul Train and the Afro and the bell bottoms. Don't have them worry about revolution. So as we talk about that, we'll look at that. Also, and the final one was the goal was to prevent the long-range growth of militant organizations, especially among the youth. And so to do that, they use surveillance. We talked about how they were funded to do all those things. Infiltration, they use people who maybe had a small baby charge against them and say, if you don't want to go to prison, then go down to that local office. We'll pay you. Give us the information we'll need, and we'll handle it that way. And that's the way we'll infiltrate these organizations. Psychological warfare, spread and misinformation. We'll see that in the case studies that we talk about. Harassment, bombing offices, taking you up for a charge, and then 3 weeks later letting you out saying you didn't do nothing. And then violence. In some cases, they kill. So raids on on the Panthers. Let's see where we want to start here. Let's start with the Panther 21. The Panther 21 were 21 revolutionaries out of New York. And what made this such a unique thing is that New York was so we talked about Harlem for the Harlem Renaissance. We talked about the Black Arts Movement having its roots in Chicago. It was one of the major metropolitan areas in the country. So the New York Panther chapters were like the spigot or the plug to Philly, everybody along the seaboard, Philly, DC, Boston, and the like. So cutting the head off of the East Coast Panthers was very important to the powers that be. And you see Afeni Shakur circled there. So to make a long story short here, because I want to make sure we get through this and still keep on time. The Panther leaders were charged with they were raided at their homes or at the Panther headquarters. 21 were charged with terrorist activities. They said they were trying to bomb government buildings and police precincts, etc. 21 were tied up in court with $100,000 bails, total facing 360 years in prison. So when the trial started, the COINTELPRO had informants that would do something like this: pretend you were one of them and sell them guns, government guns. Then they get caught with the guns defending themselves, and now you got a gun charge against you. Or you organizing in the community, and these folks going back and say, hey, man, they got to do this, they about to do that, and you get this information back. So many of the charges were trumped up to do several things. To show the community, these ain't revolutionaries, these is criminals. They want to rob the bank. They want to bomb churches, precincts, and all this other stuff. And that wasn't it. And so now you have 21 Panthers in prison with $100,000 bonds. You got Huey still in prison on the West Coast. Every city you got Panthers going in. So you got those who are out. You got Eldridge Cleaver out of the country now. So you got Bobby Seale at home and David Hilliard, who was next in command, who was the chief of staff, now in command, handling some of these duties. And now you start to see, Kathleen Cleaver left with Eldridge. So you got other people now rising to the top. You raising money for their defense, because the national office and the local office trying to get these revolutionaries out for something they ain't even do. So again, Jane Fonda, shout out to Jane Fonda. I never knew this before doing my research. They were holding fundraisers at her house, and celebrities who had bread at that time was putting in on it. And so the Panthers would go, and designated people would speak, but the majority of there would just go in there with their leathers and their berets and be tough as hell and handle their business. To make a long story short, over 13 months, and this trial was, it was just like the OJ trial, if you want to go back there. That's my generation. 13-month trial, millions of dollars spent by the state, dozens of witnesses, hundreds of pieces of evidence. And so you had these revolutionaries in jail for years. Afeni was in there pregnant. These brothers in there on trumped up charges. So you had people in prison outside of their Panther offices and doing the work that was done in the community. You had to have other people step up. Now you got infiltration happening. You got such an unstable environment happening while you take the leadership away. Jury deliberated for 3 hours, all not guilty, 156 not guilty verdicts. Most of them were locked up for 2 years in a trial that lasted over 8 months. Though the 21 were acquitted, other trials were still going on in the country. So you had legal bills, you had money being raised, you got people going back, you got a purge of membership because people starting to say, I just want to fight the power. I don't want to be sent to prison. I don't want my wires tapped. I don't want to be a part of all this. So you're having a party who's decentralized, facing a force that nobody was ready for. So it started to consume the organization. Is this person a Fed? Is this an op? Is this somebody we can't trust? Is it somebody you can? So while COINTELPRO is saying, oh man, Brother Moore is he's working with us. Oh, this person doing this. So you're having distrust. You're having people looking over your shoulder. You having people you work with that were your comrades now wondering what's up. So it was a very unstable time in this organization. So that's a quick story on the Panther 21. Panther 21 found not guilty of all the stuff that they said, but 2 years away from their families, 2 years incarcerated, and God knows what else was happening. Afeni was her own lawyer, got her, and you know, we know the story there. So that's the Panther 21 story in a nutshell. COINTELPRO infiltrating, giving false messages, harassing, and sending you to jail, and then got out. So that's one example as we look at what was going on. Let's see. Let's go back to our good brother Fred Hampton in Chicago. So to make a long story short, and I'll provide a link to some more of this stuff as we move forward. You know, Fred was building. He was found to be the chair of the Illinois chapter. And he was gonna be brought into the national office. You know how Panther Mandate brought in Stokely. He was going to be brought in to be leadership in the national as well. But to make a long story short, William O'Neill, this brother who I'll send the link to him, he infiltrated the Panthers. He became Fred's head of security. And to make a long story short, it was a outstanding battle between the local police and the Black Panthers, shootouts. It was they bombed the office, and on December 4th, and if you know anybody in my family know the significance of that day, December 4th, it's my grandma's birthday. 1969, Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were killed in an assault, an all-out assault by Chicago police, led by COINTELPRO, and they killed Mark Clark, who was a leader of in the Illinois chapter. Another, I forget what chapter it is specifically, and Fred Hampton from Chicago. What makes this interesting is that there were 200 shots. They came in and basically, instead of using tear gas or anything else, they came, opened the door. Mark Clark was there securing the place, popped him, went in and aired the place out. And when they were done, the state's attorney said, well, let me tell you what happened. It was 200 shots fired. We shot half of them. We told them to stop. They wouldn't, so we kept shooting. And then the Panthers shot the other half, and so we had to shoot everybody up, and then they came out with their hands up. Everybody was buying into this story except for one a reporter from the Sun-Times. He went and did an investigation and said, hold up, all the gunfire coming from one direction. What y'all talking about? And so it started to build this question around if the states were telling the truth. And so while it was open, Panthers were bringing people into there. Look what's going on here. Look what's going on there. Fred Hampton's lover at the time was pregnant, so she made it out and she told her story. And so now it was a question around what the heck happened there. And so an investigation happened, and they end up finding out that, to make a long story short, that it was true that this was a execution by the police, and it was an attempt to take out by federal orders Fred Hampton, and through infiltration, through planting misinformation, they killed Chairman Fred. And what would end up happening is later, a few 10, maybe 10, 20 years later, 15 years later, it was a settlement where the survivors got $1.8 million from the government, but nobody ever went down for this murder. So we have two examples of COINTELPRO just using all that they have in New York against the Panther 21 coming up just short, and going into, remember we talked about a rise of the Black Messiah. They made sure that this 21-year-old revolutionary would not live to see the light of day. So think about it. You got Huey P. Newton still in prison. You got Eldridge Cleaver in Algeria. You got Bobby Seale. We'll talk about him being on the run. He got locked up again for what was going on in Chicago during the Democratic Convention. And you got who was next, next up, murdered. So you're seeing an all-out assault by the federal government against the Panthers here. So I said this is a tough one. Drop any questions you got in the chat, any observations, go ahead and drop them in there. Shout out to the people I see in the chat today, and in the views. Shout out to you for being here. I appreciate you. So I kind of mentioned this earlier. So last week I talked about the difference between essentially the cultural nationalists, those who were more apt to take an African name and go the intellectual route and preserve culture, versus the revolutionary activists. As I said, city by city, this was different. But in some of the core areas, Oakland, LA, it was a really big problem between those who wanted to think the revolution and those who wanted to kick off the revolution. And this happened in LA. One of the many things that happened in LA between Bunchy Carter and John Huggins, husband of Erica Huggins, who we'll talk more about. To make a long story short, UCLA was a hotbed of intellectual activity, and they were starting an African American Studies program, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about the rise of Black studies in through our conversation around the Black Arts Movement next week. And the US organization, United Slaves, founded by Karenga, the gentleman who started Kwanzaa, and the Panthers here. Bunchy Carter was a local. He was a core kind of Panther to the core of it. Grew up a kid in the ghetto. Joined the Slauson gang in LA. Did 4 years on a bid. Converted to Islam. After he got out, he met Eldridge Cleaver, who also did a bid, and said, maybe this ain't the thing for you. He decided to go against Islam. He joined the Panthers after he met Huey, and he started the Southern California chapter. John Huggins was one of the other Southern California organizers as well. Well, at that time, one of the main things they were fighting over, them in the US organization, was who should lead this and who should lead this Black Studies department at UCLA. And later we'll talk about Angela Davis and her role in that as we talk about some of the other revolutionaries outside of the Black Panthers as we move forward in the class. And to make a long story short, I guess it's kind of twofold. You don't always like everybody that you partnered up with. Just personal things. We the Panthers, we represent this. Or we the US organization, we Panther this. And I don't even like them niggas like that, bro. Y'all ain't the ops like the pig, but we ain't got love for each other like that. So that's kind of one of them things. Brothers who just didn't see each other the same way. They weren't on the same page, which you don't have to be. In the revolution, everybody ain't on the same page. But through infiltration of COINTELPRO writing letters back and forth and telling the US organization, hey, Bunchy and the Panthers said they said this about Karenga. They saying they're gonna put a hit out on them. They saying they doing this. And then they also writing letters to the Panthers, hey, the US organization saying y'all this, saying that. And because everybody's worried about who is and who ain't a Fed, everybody is kind of on edge. So to make a long story short, on UCLA's campus, as they're trying to figure out who's going to lead this African American Studies department, they both were back in two different entities. Tempers flared, and a couple brothers from the US organization killed Bunchy Carter and John Huggins on UCLA's campus in January 1969. And the that chapter was one of the fastest growing, one of the most explosive chapters. They had a breakfast program. They had firearms training. Elaine Brown, Geronimo Pratt came through that chapter. And so, the feds were using the COINTELPRO, were infiltrating these organizations and having the rats eat themselves, so to speak. So this is another example of, infighting, but this infighting wasn't just because they had a problem. Misinformation, surveillance, government ops using these things to kill Panthers. And so I won't even go into that. 2 of our fallen soldiers. So now we got little Bobby gone. We got Bunchy Carter and John Huggins gone. Others along the way that I just can't mention in the time that we have. And it's a travesty. Another thing that happened in LA a little bit later in 1969. So you have this happening in January 69. You got Fred going down and Mark Clark going down in December 69. And now you into December 69 so now you got these versions of the leaders of the LA Panthers are gone. So who rises up next? One is Geronimo Pratt. And we'll talk about him as we move forward because he has a long lineage of how he got railroaded into prison and did 20 years off of Humble. And so Geronimo Pratt, a former Chicago Panthers versus us in the LA shootout. Let's move to the LA shootout. So now we have Geronimo Pratt and others, bringing leadership to the LA chapter. This happened in January with Bobby Huggins and with Bunchy Carter. And now we're going into December that year, right after Chairman Fred is murdered. We have, let me see, let me get my notes in front of me. I want to make sure I'm representing this well. You have a shootout between the Panthers, the LA Panthers, and LAPD, backed by COINTELPRO. And basically, because Geronimo Pratt was a Vietnam vet, he gave them the strategy on how to navigate this. So they sandbagged the office for protection. They were going to hold in. They fortified the headquarters. They built a tunnel to the sewer line, so if they had to get out, they could. And they were ready to go blow for blow with LAPD. This is SWAT action. We talked about the SWAT team. So the SWAT team is going early in the morning to execute the Panthers on a no-knock warrant. Panthers was ready, start upping the thing, shooting from the buildings, and they knew how to protect themselves. They had a former Vietnam vet, Geronimo Pratt, teaching them how to navigate it. One technique they used, they said they would take, because everybody was smoking cigarettes back in the day, they would take the filters of the cigarettes, put them in their nose, so when the tear gas came, they could handle that. So to make a long story short, you had about 15 Panthers in there against a whole SWAT team, whole LAPD department, and they had the shootout. We talking about hours, 5-hour gun battle that they had. To make a long story short, 11 Panthers were arrested who were barricaded in there, and police ended up, taking advantage of the situation and taking them Panthers in. The Panthers ultimately surrendered under a white flag. 3 police officers were wounded by the gunfire. Several Panthers also. It was just a travesty to see, by and large, how the Panthers were executed over that time. So now we're faced with a couple of different dilemmas. So now and I didn't talk about this much, we'll get this next class. Bobby Seale was a part of, he showed up to the Democratic Convention in 1968 with some anti-war protesters because he was building a coalition to get Huey out of prison. He was later found to be one of the agitators of the uprising that happened. So he was taken into prison, taken into jail in Chicago. And that was if you remember anything, a story about the Panthers, he was bound and gagged because he wouldn't stop talking. And to make a long story short there, because of the mistreatment and how it got out, it ended up being released. But now you got Huey gone, Eldridge gone, Bobby gone, your central leadership gone from the Panthers. So others are rising up, namely David Hilliard, who was the chief of staff. You have H. Rat Brown, who's taken over after Stokely had his fire. We didn't get into that today. We'll get into that as we move forward. Not next week, but the week after. Next week, we're talking Black Arts Movement and kind of centering around some of our arts in that regard, taking a break off some of the Panther action. And so now we're having a dawning of a new day. You have a new round of leaders coming to take up the revolution, and you have police at full guard and COINTELPRO navigating through the process. So let's just take a quick step back as we kind of summarize what we talked about today. Drop any questions you have in the chat. Still loving to see the people and the energy we got in the chat with us and in the views today. That's what's up. You're making me feel good today, making me feel like I want to keep this going. So that's what's up. If you aren't signed up for the class, what you can do is drop your email address to me on Facebook, or you can drop it in this chat, and I will get you the information to get signed up so you can receive this stuff. So we talked about first our introduction to Black Power. This session was about Fred Hampton, his coalition building report, his revolutionary approach to Black Power, how he used socialist and anti-capitalist rhetoric to bring people together who were the underdogs to fight against the power. We then talked about the Panther survival programs and how the food program, the clinic program, the education, political education programs, and the service to the community were the core parts of the organization. We looked at how law and order used laws, the 1965 through 1968 laws, where they were putting in repression against gun ownership and permission and agitation and acceleration for feds and local government to do that, what I just showed today, the armed attacks against the Panthers. We talked about Nixon and his law and order philosophy and how he had the okay of the public and the government and local police to put the battery pack to do these things. We talked about the Free Huey movement and how he was, in prison for a manslaughter charge and how he was eventually convicted, but there was an appeal coming, and we'll talk about that moving forward. We talked about the murder of Little Bobby and the exile of after Dr. King was killed, and that shootout in the exile of Eldridge Cleaver to Algeria, and how he started the chapter of the international sector of the Black Panthers. We also talked about the party expansion of the Panthers, where you had a decentralized movement of people saying, I want to get on the train, without central leadership able to provide as much as they need to, because they were all under assault. And I didn't even talk about how these other chapters were under assault as well. We just looked at New York, LA, Chicago. We didn't look at every chapter I showed you. They were all under attack. There were shootouts, there were bombings, there were people going to prison, Panthers defense funds around all of these cities. So revolutionaries under attack. And we finally talked about, how the attack on the Panthers in different cities around the country, and how it brought forth new leadership. So this is one of the heavier conversations. Like I said, it's a conversation where we have to dig in and kind of put our big man and woman pants on and look at really what happened to our freedom fighters. Let me bring the deck back up real quick and finish our way through there. Panther 21. We'll get more into the anti-war solidarity. That's what brought Stokely, the Panthers, Students for a Democratic Society, and others together to fight against the war. And that's my main man, Chairman Fred, right there giving a speech. So let me take this down and give just a moment here for any questions, any comments. Let me know if you understand what I'm talking about. If I wasn't clear on something, let me know if you have any questions, but just provide any feedback. Feel free to do so. I appreciate your time and your presence, and I'll give you a couple moments to do that while we summarize this last tip here. Let me pull this up. Where is it here? I'll save that for next time. Let's see. I see we gotta see. I understand. I learned so much tonight. Thanks. Appreciate that. So next week we're gonna take a break. We've been in the Panthers. We've been deep since they were the center part of the class. Next week will be week 4, but lesson 5. We'll get into the Black Arts Movement, and I want to talk about the Black Arts Movement through definitely a heavy discussion, but critical to beware of America. Yeah, exactly. Next week we'll take a look at how we used our fine arts, our poetry, our literature to fight the power, and also and learn from it. Still using these tactics. Exactly. On a different podcast, I would say, if you see what's been going on with your boy Young Thug lately, a very interesting way, and the RICO against hip hop. I got a lot to say about that, but that's another thing for another day. But these tactics are still being used, and now we're starting to see them used in a lot of different communities as well. But next week we'll get a chance to talk about Chicago and Detroit's long history in the Black Arts Movement, Harlem and New York, Newark and New Jersey with Amiri Baraka. We'll talk about some seminal events. In Fisk, they had a Black Arts gathering. In Detroit, we had a Black Arts gathering. The publishers out of Chicago and Detroit, how down south got in the mix. And we'll talk about some of the most important artists and some of the most seminal work coming into the Black Arts Movement. And using that, I'll leave it here. There's a gentleman named Larry Neal and his philosophy of the Black aesthetic. That's going to be next week's defining Black power through the Black aesthetic and Larry Neal. So we'll definitely dig into that. Take a break from the Panthers. We'll talk a little anti-war. We'll talk a little bit of Stokely, see what he's up to. Maybe a little H-Rap Brown to get him in the mix so we don't lose everything. But we definitely want to lean into the creative part of our culture as well. I want to thank everybody for being here. You don't understand how much. Well, I don't want to say it that way. I put a lot of work into it, and not just to say I put a lot of work into it. This information is so important. So when people are actually here to share this information and take it and share it out to your world, it means so much. We're in a time where this information could be considered terrorist information at one point, the way the government looking. So sharing this information is important to me. I'm amassing a library. I'm amassing not just followers in the sense of followers, but also people who believe in our history, who want to preserve our history, who want to make sure our history is still here to tell our kids and our grandkids and their kids and their kids. So when you're here with me, you're not just here watching this, you're playing your part in the struggle and keeping our history alive. And I appreciate that you're here. Professor Barnes always going to be here, Dwayne Barnes, MPA, and we're going to be doing this till the wheels fall off or till they stop my connection. Again, thank you. Next week we talking Black Arts Movement, and I'll see you next week. Like Russell Simmons would say, thanks for coming out. God bless and good night. Peace.